Good evening, everyone. My name is Terence Houlihan. I'm the chair of school counseling here at Ridgefield High School. Joining me tonight are Nicole Usher, who's also a school counselor at Ridgefield High School, been with us for a number of years, and also one of the team leaders for the junior curriculum when it comes to developmental school counseling lessons. Also with us is Shannon Kelly, who is the Associate Director of Admissions at the University of Notre Dame. And Shannon, I believe you've been there for about 10 years now. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
All right, wonderful. So my role tonight is going to be multifaceted. I'm going to do the welcoming and turn it over to Nicole Usher in just a few moments. In the meantime, you may hear some dinging in the background, and that is me allowing people to enter this Google Meet. We are rising in numbers. We are at 85. And once I mute, you'll no longer hear that dinging in the background. The other thing that I will be doing is I will be monitoring the chat. So what I would invite you to do is if at any point during Ms. Usher's presentation or Ms. Kelly's presentation, if on the bottom right you have a specific question, that you click the chat button, type it in. I'll be monitoring that. So when we do get to Q&A, which will be a little bit later in the presentation, I'll have an opportunity to read the questions aloud to both of our presenters. So for now, I would just ask you to mute. And before we get started, just take a deep breath and let it go, because we are now all officially entering the wonderful world of the college search process. And remember that you are part of this process with your children, and we are here to help you along with the process. So without further ado, just for everyone's information, as I said in the email, this presentation is being recorded and it will be presented on the school counseling website in just a few days. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole Usher, who is going to talk about the college process as it relates to junior year and a little bit of senior year. Take it away, Nicole.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. As Mr. Houlihan said, my name is Nicole Usher. I'm one of the school counselors. My alpha is the end. So if your student has a last name T through Z, that I'm likely their school counselor. So I'm going to go over a few slides that I created to talk a little bit about what you can expect as we approach our junior seminars and what we do in the spring to help our juniors. So let me just get started here. So starting on January 26th, we're going to be meeting with all of the juniors in small groups. We're going to be meeting with them 5 times, and we'll be talking about a variety of topics. We'll be doing some personality assessments to help them in their career search. We'll be talking about an introduction to the college application process. We're going to help students work on building their resume. We're going to do a review of Naviance and all of the associated features that are available, including a super match tool, the college research tools, overview of what they'll do senior year when they're actually submitting their applications. And in these seminars, students were, every effort was made to place the students with their assigned school counselor. That wasn't always the case, but I would say probably about 95% of the students are with their assigned school counselor. We're also going to be doing a session around course selection to help your student prepare to be able to choose classes for senior year. We're also holding individual meetings during the springtime. We'll be starting in March. Students will be encouraged to sign up for individual meetings in the spring with their counselor. We will remind them in the seminars, in our course selection meetings, and as well as whenever we see them in the hall. These are meetings designed to help students with their individual post-secondary plans. So while in the seminar we cover a wide variety of topics, this is more focused on the individual students' goals, whether that be college, tech school, gap year, military, whatever their goal is, we want to work with them to reach that. Parents are always welcome to attend, but you're not required to attend. I've had parents join this year with seniors virtually. Parents are allowed to come back in the building now, so I've had parents come in. It can be really helpful to understand the process so you can support your child as they're going through this journey in terms of knowing the vocabulary, the lingo, what's a Common App, what does Naviance do, what's FAFSA, all of that stuff. It's a good time to ask those questions. We can meet with the students as many times as they like to stay on track, and we'll also talk about what they can do over the summer to help prepare so when they come back in the fall, they're pretty confident and can just get going right away. Some important things to consider as we're getting to that time when families are scheduling tours or thinking about, what the process will look like. Tours are a great option. A lot of schools are starting to offer on-campus tours. Some are still restricted. There are a lot of great virtual tours on there on the individual school websites that's also featured in Naviance. So it's a good way to get a sense of the campus, the layout, the surrounding areas. So it's not perfect, but it's certainly a great option. There's also a lot of different deadlines. So talking about that, you'll hear a lot of abbreviations, early action, early decision, regular decision. We'll be talking about what the difference between all of those so you and your student understand and how to meet those goals and to meet those deadlines. Letters of recommendation, we're going to strongly encourage students to ask 2 teachers before the end of their junior year. It should be teachers that know them well, that can speak to their abilities as a student. The letter of recommendation from a teacher is really designed to see if a student is college ready. So they're going to be looking at their levels of responsibility, their accountability, participation, integrity. Those are all the things that teachers are going to highlight. Counselors also write a letter that's more focused on the student's context within the community, as well as specific attributes we may have seen while working with them. We're going to have students become aware and start to create their comment application. That is available now to students, and they can start working on that. Some of it is fairly straightforward in terms of your name, demographics, birth date. Some of the things will require their GPA and classes for next year, but they can certainly become familiar with the site and what they will need to know. They could also view the Common App essay prompt, which technically always remain the same. I think this year they changed one, but students have the ability to choose from 6 prompts. They also have the ability to write one on whatever they want. So it's very open. And standardized testing. I know Shannon's going to cover that a little bit today, but a lot of schools are remaining test optional for the class of 2023. So as colleges release more of that information, we'll certainly publish this. And there's a website called fairtest.org. It's a great resource to learn what schools require standardized testing, what's optional, and really keep track of all of those nuances. Some other important information, we're going to be conducting course selection in February. The exact dates will be determined, but it will be taking place after midterms in the start of the new semester. The school day SAT for juniors will be held on March 24th. You don't need to register your student. There's no fee, nothing's required. Your child will just show up on that day and take their exam. We will be holding a college fair at Ridgefield on April 27th, so more details about that will be forthcoming. There's also the Saturday SAT, which will be held at Ridgefield on March 12th, May 7th, and June 4th. You would need to register through that for College Board. And there's also ACTs on Saturday on February 12th, April 2nd, and June 11th. We don't hold the ACT at Ridgefield High School, but a lot of the local high schools, including Danbury, do usually host the ACT, so that is also an option. So I am going to turn it over to Shannon. I don't want to take away from her time, and I look forward to answering any questions. And once again, thank you for joining us today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nicole. I will just share my screen here and we'll get started. Alrighty, friends. Well, thank you so much for having me tonight. Again, my name is Shannon Kelly. I'm an admissions counselor from the University of Notre Dame. And on behalf of Notre Dame, thank you so much for allowing us to kind of share a little bit of our story and just a little bit about the college admissions process. As Terry mentioned, yeah, definitely want to take some time to breathe. I really looking forward to kind of sharing a little bit about this process because it is a really great opportunity for your student just to reflect and think critically about who they are and where they're going. And so I hope that tonight I am only adding value to your life. I hope you don't walk away going, God, I wish I had those 25 minutes back. I'm really here just to give you the facts so that you can, whether it's tonight, tomorrow, or the next 6 months, have some real conversations about what college looks like for your student. Alrighty, so to dive in, let's see. There we go. Just kind of going over order of events here. Again, we're going to be breathing a lot. So just taking a deep breath and really just enjoying this process. Going to leave some parents with homework assignments. It's going to be important as your student begins their journey over the next kind of year and a half that everyone is having honest life chats with one another. As much as this is going to be your student's process, right? They're going to be working with the colleging staff. They're going to be, cultivating their college list. It's going to be important for you as a family to think critically. Is this college or colleges, are they a good financial fit for our family? And so it's important to have those conversations early rather than later. Because things just get a little bit harder. If your student identifies their dream school and maybe that school doesn't make sense for you financially, it's good to have that chat now than maybe 6 months to a year down the road. I do want to provide a little bit of context. I know in the last 2 years, especially since the pandemic started, there's been major disruption just to college admissions at large. New language, new buzzwords, new this, new that. I think we've all kind of lost sight of what are we doing and where are we going? So I want to give a little bit of context to how we got to where we are right now. For the juniors, give you some things to think about as you prepare. I love that Nicole kind of laid out exactly what the timeline looks like for Ridgefield High here in the next couple months. So I will just give some other things to think through as you're discerning and creating those college lists. We'll jump into some things on admissions and financial aid, and then leave some words of wisdom just from my own experience over the last 10 years working in college admissions. The first slide here. The ongoing pandemic has really disrupted everything, and we are just all learning how to live with it and continue forward. A lot of families, I think last year thought, well, once the pandemic is over, this, and this. A lot of colleges felt the same way. Once the pandemic is over, this, and this. And we've just learned to adjust and adapt to the reality of it is the pandemic's not really going anywhere. And so if you're trying to strategically plan certain things, movement of the pandemic, it's really hard to do that. So just focus on what you know and really make informed decision based off the information that you have in front of you. Know that colleges and universities have adjusted their policies and procedures over the last 2 years. And so I'll make sure to highlight some of those things throughout tonight's presentation so that you are armed and ready to go as you make those college visits that to be asking the right questions of your colleges and universities. So, going back to the idea of life chats, and I really want to highlight, this process is supposed to be exciting. It's not supposed to be overwhelming for your student. There are going to be some really great moments, and there's going to be some, maybe some moments that you wish you got back. But overall, these next year and a half to 2 years are really about your student finding that next place, right? Finding that place that makes sense for them academically, socially, spiritually, all the things. So you as a family, it's going to be important to have some honest conversations about paying for college, attending college. I know for some of you, you've graduated from a 4-year institution, and I suspect that maybe you want your son or daughter to attend that 4-year school. Maybe that place is not for them. Maybe they have no interest of going there. And so I think be really thoughtful in your dinner conversations. If you're sitting at the kitchen table or having that chat in the car, asking your student where exactly they want to be or where they see themselves. They may not have the right answer right now, but if you could just be that great resource for them throughout the next couple months and year, that would be fantastic. And then finally, and before we really dive into all things college admissions, know that there's more than one path to get to where your student needs to be. I know sometimes after a graduation, especially from high school, that the automatic outcome is, or result will lead to a 4-year college or university. Note that some students are not structured for a 4-year college or university. And again, so this goes back to having those honest conversations. It could be that your student wants to go to trade school, wants to do an internship or service after graduation. Maybe they want to be employed. Maybe they have a startup idea that they want to explore and implement. Maybe they just want to go to the local college down the street. I think those are important conversations, again, to have now, and know that there's life beyond the 4-year college. I'm sure Ridgefield High School will be working with your students to find a path that makes sense for them. But again, for all families to kind of be on the same page, there's more than one way to get to your kid where they need to be. Alrighty, so let's take a step back. Last 2 years, again, we've seen a lot of disruption in college admissions, between new verbiage from the test optional to schools having to take lots of students off their wait list because of as a result of the pandemic. Some schools closing, some schools opening. It just was a little bit of chaos. We've also seen a significant increase in college applications across the U.S. Where are these applications coming from? Are there more students applying to college? Where are they coming from? Have populations increased? There's just a lot of unknowns. And so I thought I'd just create a brief synopsis here of, in the last 20 years, how did all the things happen, right? And so if we take a step back, really in the early 2000s, we saw a lot of colleges using paper apps, right? And a lot of colleges using their own applications to have students apply. With that kind of process in play, it's a little bit tougher for students to apply to college. And so in the late 2000s, we see the creation of the Common Application. This is a one-hit shop where students can apply to 8, 10, 5, different schools. And that application is sent off to a bunch of different schools in one shot. And so more and more students are feeling the ability to apply to college because of the Common Application is creating more opportunities for them to apply to more schools. Over the last 20 years, we've seen an increase in marketing and recruitment. So more schools are on the road, hitting, boots on the ground, heading off to high schools and local, counties to host different information sessions. You see counselors forward facing on the internet. So we've seen a lot of virtual sessions going on as a result of the pandemic. So I think schools are more intentional about identifying your student and really yielding them in through different programs and really just trying to, identify students that really could see themselves at their college or university. We've also seen an increase in financial aid packaging over the last 20 years. So more benefactors and states contributing funding to colleges and universities. So where maybe 15 years ago, a student might have been on a partial scholarship, we're seeing more and more students on full rides. We see more insurance programs. This would be something like a student gaining automatic admission to not only undergrad or potentially med school or law school. That seems to be pretty consistent among some of the flagship state schools around the US. And so we've seen an uptick in these types of programs. We've also seen something gaming the ratings. And what does that mean? Basically, students strategically applying to colleges and universities. So basically taking data that they see online and trying to kind of put up together a formula to figure out where exactly they have their best shot of getting into a college or university. Not taking into consideration whether they like a school or not, using pure data to kind of dictate where they should be applying. And so we've seen some students just kind of throwing their hat in the ring to colleges and universities that don't really mean anything to them. They just want to see if they get in or not. And so that I think that's really hard to track in the college admissions process, but that is something that you're going to hear about as students are applying to college. We've also seen an increase in test prep companies as well. So more independent counselors working with students. Therefore, students are receiving more help to navigate the college admissions process. They're more likely to apply to college. And then last but not least, test optional. Over the last 2 years, we've seen this test optional, test blind, and I'll explain all these definitions in a little bit. But students are not being required to submit the SAT and ACT anymore. And with that last kind of barrier, they're more inclined to apply to colleges just to see what happens. Again, not really thinking through if this college is a good fit for me, socially, academically, financially, or spiritually, just want to see if I have a shot at getting into this school. And so keeping all these factors in mind, we just have seen an increase in applications. And I think schools, especially a place like Notre Dame, have to really think critically about the students that are applying. Is this a student that aligns with our mission? And is this a student that really wants to be at a place like Notre Dame or Harvard or Princeton or University of Texas? And so just the increase has really forced us to work a little bit harder in our selection process. So now that you've kind of been given a little bit of context of why there's been an explosion in applications, hopefully that doesn't create any havoc in your life. Keeping all these factors in mind, I suspect you probably have the question of, where does that put my kid? What do we need to be doing as a family? I think you need to be doing what you've been doing. And that is working in tandem with your high schools, right? So tonight is the initial kind of start to the college process. And so continue to work in collaboration with your college counselors to create a list of schools that make sense. Understanding that there has been an increase in applications, you don't need to strategize too much about this, right? I think it's important to think through what makes sense for us socially, academically, spiritually, financially. If you keep those things in mind, you can create a really solid list that makes sense for you as a student. As you're having those conversations with your high school counselor and you're doing your course selection, if your school has certain expectations or your university and colleges have certain expectations, make sure that your high school curricula and the courses that you're taking align with maybe some of the expectations of that school. So I think it's important that just because you're having a college conversation now with your college counselors, the work that is being done in high school doesn't stop, right? We've got concurrent goals. You're working at the same pace for both things and making sure you're putting in your best effort to reach the goal of getting into one of these colleges. The second point there, conducting research. The advice I have there, I suspect after you have your initial conversations with some of your guidance counselors that they're going to give you some homework to do research on your schools of interest, whether that's on the internet or engaging with alumni or meeting with different current students that might have graduated from your high school that attend the university. I really encourage you to get your information from primary resources. Avoid the dark web. There are some web pages out there that are allegedly for college admissions that are sharing information that is inaccurate. If you as a student and a family are utilizing web pages such as College Confidential, I will tell you now, you're being steered in the wrong direction. Really utilize those primary resources, your guidance counselor, the school website, the school itself, engaging with current students. These are the people that are going to give you the real facts that will help you make an informed decision when creating that college list. Parents, there is going to be a time where your students is going to say, all right, mom and dad, legal guardian, I've got 8 schools that I'm really, really interested in. I want to go visit them. This is a time for you to take advantage of, those local tours. So if you're on the East Coast and you want to visit some of the local colleges, do it. As Nicole mentioned, there are some colleges that are open. Most of us are. Definitely would call before you schedule a big trip out to California or Texas just to make sure that you're going to get the most out of that trip. But there's a lot of different ways to engage with colleges, whether that's on a virtual platform, in person, college fairs, open houses, school representatives. We are, visiting more and more high schools as the months go on. This is a great opportunity for you to really get to know the people that you might be going to school with. And so parents, this is kind of where you step in to help out with organizing those trips, but more so making sure that you're asking the right questions. I understand that we don't know what we don't know, especially if this is your first child going to college or the last one or the one in between. When you're on these college trips, I always, suggest to parents or, guardians, ask that question, when you're talking to an admissions counselor, what admissions policies are there? Force that counselor to really kind of rattle through some changes that have occurred so that you have a better idea of what to expect for you and your student. Sometimes students are really great at the research, but might miss some of the finer details. So I think it's going to be important for your family and for you to just ask those broader questions when you're on the college tours. The fourth point there, organize. It is going to be incredibly important for your family to remain organized. When you're having some of these initial conversations and collaborating with college counselors, it's a lot of information. It's information overload, maybe something you're feeling right now, hopefully not. But I suggest building a spreadsheet, list the schools, and just the expectations. What do they need? What are the deadlines? What application can I apply with? If you visit that school, how did you feel after it? Did you not like anybody you engaged with? Is this a school that you can see your future self? Is this a school that offers your major? It's going to be key, again, that you're reflecting and thinking critically about what you want, but remaining organized. So that way, when it's April of your senior year and you've got to make a college decision, that you've got all the great details right in front of you to make that choice. And then finally, as you kind of wrap up junior year and you head into, senior year summer, right before the start of senior year, as you're cultivating those college lists and you've got a little bit of time on your hands, maybe during the summer, start building out that resume. I know sometimes when we hear the word resume, we think of something incredibly formal, something like you would apply for a job of some sort. This is really just a way for you to record what you've done over the last 3 years and going into that fourth year. So start thinking through, okay, what activities have I done? What is some of the leadership? Do I have any work experience? Did I, gain any accomplishments, captain of a team, or maybe I'm a 4.0 student, so I got a certificate or something. Capturing that information now will be really helpful because I find that sometimes when seniors get to the end, they start to forget a little bit of what they've done. And, those kind of points are important when you're applying to college. We want to know all the things about you. And so if you're able to capture that information early, that's going to be important. And one final piece is start thinking about your college essay. I suspect your college counselors and your English teacher will start chatting with you about this in early spring and maybe going into the summer. But start thinking about the college essay. If you have time to start drafting out some ideas, procrastination is a real thing. We can definitely tell when a student has waited to the 11th hour to fill out their essay and submit the application. If you can help your future self and start building out those things early, that is just going to go a long way in the college process. All right, so that's a little bit about what juniors can be thinking about. When we think about the timeline of events, as Nicole mentioned, yes, you can technically go on to Common App and search the Common App at any point. Applications go live, meaning the first opportunity for you to submit an application will be August 1. So you can save your information and then be able to submit at that point. Application deadlines vary, and we'll talk a little bit about what those deadlines look like. But every school has a different deadline. So again, this is really where details come into play, making sure that you're asking the university, whether it's online or with the college admissions counselor, when is your deadline, so that the student, and staying on track along the way. After you apply to college, this is not for you just to sit back and be like, all right, I'm good, I don't have to do anything else. Colleges expect you to remain engaged even after you apply. So whether that's submitting updated grades, submitting updates, personal updates or academic updates, whatever update you want to share, something great has happened in your life, please tell that college admissions staff, because that will play definitely a big role in our decision. We want students who want to go to our school. So if you remain engaged, that definitely is something that we'll be looking through throughout the college admissions process. Once you submit the application and this colleges have an opportunity to evaluate those applications, decisions will be released, typically in a timeline between December and April. And again, this is dependent upon when you decide to apply to college. So I gave that range of months there, December through April. Financial aid notifications will typically run on that similar timeline. So, for many students who apply early, they're going to get their notifications from financial aid earlier rather than later. So it all really, again, depends on when you apply. The national enrollment date is May 1. So everybody gets kind of the same day that they've got to commit. The service academies sometimes vary against, typical four-year colleges and universities. But again, just keeping track of this date will be important as you move along. So we've talked about kind of what junior year you could be working on, parents, the timeline of events, and then thinking about just the application itself. So let's dive in. Transcripts are definitely something that colleges will be looking for. And to be clear, one of these factors is not more important than the other. So if I talk about transcripts versus testing versus letters of recommendation, all aspects of the application are important. So it's going to be key for your student when they apply to college that they're really thinking critically about all these components so that they put together an application that makes sense for them. So with transcripts, their colleges are going to be looking for performance. They want to see over the last 4 years, what have you done? How well have you performed? Prep work. Are you prepared for that college? Have you taken on AP, IB, honors? What's the highest level offered at your high school? Have you taken advantage of that? Testing. This has been a little bit of a shift that we've seen the last 2 years. A lot of schools are not requiring the SAT or ACT anymore. So I do want to highlight this piece here. You've seen many schools refer to what's called test optional. This basically states that your student has the option to submit a test score or not. So whether it's the SAT or ACT. Now, typically the follow-up question from families is, well, should I submit it? Like, does it add value to my application? And then the response from the college will typically be like, well, it's totally up to you. It's your application. If you feel that the test score based off your performance will add value to your application, then please submit it. There are going to be some schools that offer mid 50% ranges for the SAT and ACT on their school websites. So you can utilize that as a resource when applying or deciding whether you should submit test optional or not. I do say, be cautious when you're looking at that data because sometimes the middle 50% is only representative of the students who actually applied with a test score, or it may be for students who have applied over the last 4 years. So maybe they've given you a distribution over a 4-year period. So be cautious when you're trying to make an informed decision using data provided by the university. Really, this is going to be a decision that is up to you if you want to submit an SAT or ACT or not. Schools are not going to tell you what you should be adding to your application. They're only going to say, we encourage you to, submit your best work, and you, the student, will need to decide what is my best. Is it a test score, or maybe, my transcript, my letters of recommendation, my resume really highlight who I am, and I don't need my test score to add value to the application. So something to think through there. Some schools, UC Berkeley comes to mind, have gone test blind, meaning they are not looking at the test score at all. They're just going to be looking at transcripts, letters of recommendation, essays, and extracurriculars along the way. And then finally, test flexible, which you're probably thinking like, good God, why do we have all these different options, right? So test flexible is really just giving the student the option to submit the SAT or the ACT. So still requiring the test, but students being able to kind of pick and choose what test best represents their abilities or aptitude. Next, letters of recommendation. So Nicole mentioned Ridgefield's going to require that students work with their guidance counselors and teachers to develop letters of recommendation. There are some, teachers that are really great at writing recommendations. I think for any students that are on the call tonight, make sure you identify people who actually like you. There have been time and time again where we've received letters of recommendation and the first line typically says, I'm not really sure why the student selected me to write the recommendation. And it might be that just maybe they just have not gained great insight on that student and their character and their overall kind of ability to be a great person. And so really relying on those folks that maybe see you on a day-to-day basis and maybe in a different light. Know that you don't have to submit letters of recommendation for maybe your particular major. So for example, you don't have to pick math just because you're applying for engineering. Most schools just want to see a teacher write on your behalf, typically in a core subject. So that would be a math, a science, history, foreign language, or an English. And like Nicole mentioned, hearing from the guidance counselor, because they're really great about filling in the gaps of knowledge there. Essays, this is going to be an opportunity for you to really kind of share your story. There are going to be some schools that require an interview. Notre Dame is not one of those places, but there are going to be some that you can fill out an essay or draft an essay, but then have the interview to supplement that. There are some students that are great at interviews. There are other students that not so great in person. And so utilizing the essays is an opportunity to kind of share their story and shape out their application. Colleges are looking for thoughtful responses there. Again, procrastination is a real thing. Waiting till the 11th hour to write out your essay is not ideal. We're not too picky on grammar. We do want students who, write well, have good sentence structure, but we're not looking for Pulitzer Prize winners. We just want some students to proofread and, take some time to think through, do these sentences add up and are they structured accordingly? Content doesn't really matter. We're not looking for a certain story. We just want to hear your story. And your story matters. Even if you think that you're maybe, I don't know, we've had students time and time again say, I don't think my story is important, or, I think I live a traditional life. There's nothing of value that I can add. If you take some time to really reflect, there's probably something really cool about you as a student that colleges want to hear about. So before you start drafting about something that you're not really proud of, take some time to think through that, and maybe ask your family or counselors for some advice there. And then finally, extracurriculars. Schools are going to be looking for your commitment. So how dedicated have you been? Service opportunities beyond what is required for high school graduation. Formal, informal leadership. Captains are nice, but we at Notre Dame always appreciate a kid who might lead from behind, somebody who has a strong moral compass and is a great mentor to their classmates. Looking for working hours. So if you work at Chipotle or work at a local club or something, those are some things we'll be looking for. And caretaker. If you take care of a sibling, maybe a grandparent, those are all important pieces too. I will tell you, because of the pandemic, we've seen a great disruption in the resume. And so if you as a student feel like, you're missing some depth because of maybe your freshman year or your sophomore year, know that colleges and universities will be considering that. They understand that maybe some athletic programs or some clubs have been discontinued because of the pandemic. You are not going to be penalized for that. Alrighty, last couple slides here, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. So all of this comes to, you're going to be filling out the application, and you're going to, be living your best life because you're getting towards the end of senior year and you're on a high and you're just really excited about your new prospects. But then there's going to come a time where you've got to figure out when you're applying, right? And if you had to ask me, of all the things that happen in college admissions, what are the most stressful? Financial aid can be a tough thing to navigate, but figuring out when to apply can also be a tough piece, because I feel like you're getting information from so many different people telling you when you should apply. And I know this is something that Nicole and the rest of the Ridgefield staff are going to discuss about the different deadlines. One thing I just wanted to highlight here, there are six types of application decision plans for your student to consider. Not all the plans make sense for all types of students. And so it's going to be critical as your student is mapping out the colleges and universities they might be interested in. It's going to be critical for them to then think, okay, when is the best time for me to apply? Best is not necessarily, strategizing my best advantage of getting in, but more so, when is my application going to be at its best? If by November 1, your application is going to look rock star status, there's nothing more you could possibly do to improve, then maybe an early application makes sense for your student. If you know that your kiddo maybe needs a little bit of extra time, the holiday break is going to be a good time for him or her to maybe proofread some essays, improve some grades, then maybe applying later, so regular decision, might make sense, right? So this is, I would say, going to be probably the most important your student decides decision that your student needs to think through as part of the college process. Again, this would be more towards the beginning part, but again, a conversation that definitely needs to be had. The last thing, and what I wrote there in red, redirections before applying. Every college has its own kind of conditions. So if there are any families in here that are concerned that your student might be making a decision that doesn't make sense, it's going to be important that you read the fine print at the very bottom before they plunge in, apply to a particular school. Alrighty, so we talked a lot about admissions. I did want to emphasize one slide for financial aid, and then happy to open up for Q&A. Family, parents, legal guardians, whoever is kind of responsible for the student at the session tonight. Financial aid is always a finicky topic. There are some families that always feel like, financial aid, we're not worried about it. And then there's some other families where, we really rely on this and we need as much information as possible. This is where the parents come into play, and some homework for you as you start thinking about your students' colleges and their universities. As your student is researching schools, you should be researching the cost of attendance of those institutions. Definitely utilizing financial tools like My Intuition and the Net Price Calculator. They can be a little bit tedious and may require a little bit of time on your end, but they're going to spit out an estimated total cost of attendance. And that will give you some insight to, okay, maybe this makes sense for our family, or whoa, I need to tell my student we've got to get this school off the list because there's no way we're going to make this work. Even if we got a 20% scholarship or a $50,000 grant, maybe that's not going to be enough over 4 years. So again, I think that'd be important for you to start diving in earlier rather than later. Again, as I mentioned, a lot of families say, we don't, we're not eligible for financial aid, or we're not going to make it. My thought is, when in doubt, always apply. You never know what you're going to get. Sometimes families get a couple $1,000s that helps pay for books. So yes, does it require a little bit of a time on your end to fill out the financial aid documents? Sure. But if your kid got their books paid for, I think that's a pretty sweet deal. Another thing, the last 3 points here, appeal. I don't know if our director of financial aid would be really happy about the idea of appealing decisions, but if you feel that a financial aid notification that you receive doesn't make sense or something is missing, it's going to be really important for you to speak up. And so most colleges and universities have what's called an appeal process, where you can say, hey, financial aid, not really sure what happened here. Can you walk me through how you came to this decision? So know that that's available. The last 2 pieces, emergency funds. And we saw this as a result of the pandemic. More and more schools were helping families that maybe a parent or both parents have lost jobs. And so know that that's available. I'm hoping, I don't know the employment status of all of the families here tonight. But in the event your student is a first-year college student and for whatever reason you lose your employment, please ask that financial aid office about the emergency funds and how that can be supplemented until you find full-time employment. So definitely something to look into. And again, the last piece I want to emphasize there, be honest. What financial impact will this have on your family? Have that conversation now. Don't wait until 3 weeks before your student has to make a college choice. It's better to rip the Band-Aid off while we're talking about college. Alrighty, well, I thank you so much for letting me just shower you with a bunch of information. Hopefully you walked away with one good thing. The final piece here, enjoy this process. There's more than one way to get to where you need or want to be. So that's for the students. Know that there's a path for you. Don't know what that looks like, but really think critically about who you are and where you're going, and know you'll get to where you need to be. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate you.
Shannon and Nicole, wonderful job. Thank you so much. We do have a number of questions in the chat. We do have some questions also from the Google form that was put out initially. So what I will do is start with the chat, and whichever of you two would like to chime in, please feel free. The first one that we see in the chat is, how important is it to know your intended major when applying versus being undecided?
Yeah, I can just start us off. That I feel like a lot of my answers are going to be well, it depends on the college. And it is just that. Every university has their own policies and procedures. So I'll just use my home university. So Notre Dame, we do require an intended major. You are not going to be evaluated with that in mind, because we recognize that you're 17, 18 years old, and inevitably you're going to change your major once, twice, 3 times. But that is just something that we want to have insight of. Okay, what are you thinking? There are going to be some schools that require you to apply directly into a particular college or major. And so that's another thing. And then there's some schools that, yep, you can come in undecided and float around until you figure out what makes sense for you. So that kind of goes into the details and understanding what is required of that college, and make sure you capture that information on your robust spreadsheet.
Thanks, Shannon. Nicole, do you want to add anything to that?
Pretty much what Shannon said. I think there are a few select majors that are at times direct admits, usually nursing, sometimes engineering, based on the pathway and there being very strict requirements and a progression. And I've seen some schools that will not allow you to declare a major. They want everybody to come in as undeclared. So like Shannon said, it's really a matter of looking at your students' interests, and if they are interested in a specific major, they should put that, not choosing just because they think it might allow them to get into a school, more easily. They should really go with what they're interested in, and it's perfectly fine not to know. Like Shannon said, college is about learning about yourself, about learning about options, learning about what you like, what you don't like. So I would say, definitely go with where your interests lie.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Again, in the chat, While some schools might be test optional for admission, will test scores influence financial aid packages at those same schools? I would assume that that would be for you, Shannon. And just as a note, this is not an opportunity to ask Shannon, what does your student need to do to get into Notre Dame? So it's a time for generic questions.
Yeah, for sure. And I apologize, but that is a really great question. So it will depend. There are some schools where they have said blanket, statements of, if we're test optional, we're going to be test optional all the way through. So, example, Notre Dame, we're test optional for all programs. We'll never require a test score for any of our merit programs, financial aid, or anything like that. There are some universities, however, that during the application process do state that they're test optional. But if you are applying for a merit scholarship, so a scholarship that is kind of free money to you as the student, they may ask for a test score. And so that's something that you may need to think through. Typically, those schools will give you some time to sit for an SAT or ACT. Becomes a little bit complicated because if you don't have a lot of time to take an SAT or ACT, so those are just things you'll need to think through when considering a college universities. Typically, if you're looking at a college university and you think you might be eligible for a merit scholarship, they will share that information right on their website of whether you'll need a test score or not. So it might be good to get that test score out of the way earlier rather than later.
Wonderful, thank you. Again, probably for Shannon, do you always pay full tuition if you apply early decision or ED?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm going to punt over to Nicole because I don't know, not because I don't know the answer. I feel like it might vary, but I will defer to you.
I think that depends. I think they definitely, and I don't want to say 100% on this, I think they review as provided you did your FAFSA and the CSS profile, which is another financial aid form. They would base that on, I think it's the same as if you would apply regular decision. That would be my assumption. If you would qualify for aid under another plan, they're going to, if you're eligible for certain merit scholarships, they would award you those, and they would, provided you submit the documentation, review for any need-based aid. That would be my guess for the majority of schools. But I couldn't say that for 100%.
Yeah, that I probably would have responded the same way. I think, again, there has been some schools that have changed their policies in the last 2 years. So that would be something I would be checking out on their financial aid website before you lock in. ED is a binding decision. So make sure that decision makes sense for your family financially.
So this would probably be more directed towards Nicole. How does the essay process work for a common application? And do you also need to write a specific essay for each school in the Common App?
That is a really good question, a very popular one too. So the general essay, which is submitted to all schools, is based on one of those prompt choices. So typically the prompts around talking about an obstacle that you overcame, an interest that's so meaningful, kind of themes like that. It's not a long essay. I think it's a max of 600 words. And students will work on that in their English class during first quarter of senior year. So they will have some support, some writing conference around that. Now, some schools have additional supplemental essays. Those are typically a bit shorter, more along the lines of, why do you want to attend the school? Why is the school a good fit for you? How will attending University X help you reach your goals? So while those sometimes can be shorter, they do require a little bit more knowledge, and you want to be very specific to being able to state why you want to go to that school. So that's another good reason to get familiar with the Common App and see exactly what the expectations would be in terms of additional essays, any kind of additional work that you're going to have to do. The majority of schools that I've seen don't have a whole lot of supplemental essays. I have seen some that have quite a few, and they are a little bit more challenging, kind of in-depth questions. So definitely that's something that you want to review and plan for in your students' application process.
Thank you, Nicole. Shannon, do you want to add anything to that?
No, great response, Nicole. Yeah, I think I use UC Berkeley. I think they wiped away all their supplement essays recently, which again added to the volume of applications because it was one less thing students had to worry about. Where some of us have trimmed the number of our supplement essays. So yeah, it definitely varies. It's kind of like a tweet. It's 150 words, so I mean 150 characters. So it's a very kind of short, sweet, to the point. So don't necessarily think too critically about it.
Coming from the Google form, there is a question. Can you please explain Naviance? Do we have to sign in as our child, or does RHS give us a code? How up to date are the scatter? Okay, it's a pretty in-depth question. Just in general, let me address the question in and of itself. Do we have to sign in as our child? Basically, as Nicole and Shannon said, this is a collaborative process. And one of the things that I really invite you to do is to change the preposition. Part of this process from adolescence into young adulthood is no longer doing things for our kids, it's doing things with them. So the process on Naviance, we invite you to sit down with them. They are probably going to roll their eyes and stuff, but you're experts at parenting teenagers. They will probably sigh every so often, but this is an activity that we invite you to do together. Nicole, do you want to just briefly give parents a quick summary of how we utilize Naviance within the college counseling perspective?
Sure. So Naviance has a lot of great features. It's essentially a database that has a lot of career information, college information, it has scholarship information. As you mentioned, there's scattergrams that has admission data from Ridgefield students in terms of students that were accepted and their GPAs and test scores. Those are updated annually. The only bit of caution that I have with the scattergrams is, since a lot of schools are test optional, you have to take some of that, into account, especially over the last few years. So that's definitely something, if you have questions about standardized testing and how that could impact your students' admission chances, definitely talk about that with their school counselor, just to get an understanding of that school and its policies. We also send students supplemental documents through Naviance, so that would include their transcript, their letters of recommendation, the school profile, and the secondary school report. So it's also an electronic database, if you will, to send materials. And students are assigned a login, but we don't have parent accounts. So like Mr. Houlihan said, sitting down with your child and getting familiar with it is a great way to help support them in the journey, while also encouraging them, like I said, to know the lingo and what things do and how they function.
That's perfect. Thank you. Shannon, do you want to add anything from the college admissions end in terms of how Naviance works for you?
Yeah, basically Naviance or any other kind of educational tools that are being used by high schools around the U.S. and internationally, they feed into our system. So a lot of the information is being sent to the Common App, and the Common App, which is the Common Application, or if your student utilizes the Coalition application, which is another universal app that is being used by students. All that information kind of looks like a big circle, right? Student uploads to Naviance, Naviance feeds to Common App then feeds data to the colleges, and then the colleges basically get 10 to 12 PDFs of information, of transcripts and school reports. So as your student in good disciplinary history, we get to see your family background, your essays, your resume, and it's all in a very kind of clean view for us to evaluate. So it's a great tool, and it's definitely evolved over the last few years. I think to Nicole's point, just a lot of different tools that students can utilize when, again, thinking through what are my options and where should I be considering college.
Wonderful. We are at 7:54 p.m. We have time for just a handful more questions. And while we're waiting for any additional questions, there's a couple of things that I just want to highlight from what Shannon and Nicole both had shared. One of the things that really comes to mind is, please think about it in this context, that if your student is going to go away to college, from this point until the middle to end of August in 2023, you've got about 14,500 more hours with them. So make this time count with them. Again, this is a collaborative process. Many of us come to the table as parents with our own prior experiences, our own beliefs about colleges, the disappointments, the frustrations that we might have had. And just to give you some context, in 1988, when I graduated from college, just south of me, I grew up in Yonkers, New York. CUNY Lehman College was a guarantee. Their acceptance rating was somewhere around 90%. CUNY Lehman College's current acceptance rating is at 42%. So the landscape for college admissions has changed. Many of us parents are Gen Xers, so this is part of the value of doing a presentation for junior parents in December, is to inform you enough early on. What we do is we do our best to educate you so that you and your student are better equipped to make a more informed decision. I heard a person who was the former head of NACAC, the National Association of College Admissions Counseling, Frank Sachs, say that college is a match to be made, not a prize to be won. And in other words, it's a fit. You know, if you go to Kohl's and you buy a pair of khakis that are on sale, or something that comes from a really popular brand name, you're not going to wear it if it doesn't fit. So that's a really important piece. I did see two more questions come in. The first one is, if a student has parents who are divorced, how does the financial information get submitted, and how do you apply for financial aid? Is it household income, parental, etc.? Any ideas there?
I think the FAFSA is a little bit more straightforward, which is the one that most schools use, and that's just biological parents. I believe both file with the CSS profile, which is a more in-depth form that a lot of private institutions require. That digs a little bit deeper, and if you're remarried, it takes into account those people's incomes. It takes into account equity in houses. So it takes much more of a deeper dive, whereas the FAFSA pulls mainly from your tax income, because there's a tool that will connect your tax returns right to the FAFSA, which has simplified it. But definitely you may want to speak, if your situation's a little complicated or you have specific questions, to a financial advisor, just for specific clarity, just for 100% assurance on that.
Yeah, earlier in the year, we hosted a financial aid night with a financial firm, and that was one of the things that they had suggested, that when it comes to the nitty-gritty of personal finances, it's always important to reach out to a financial advisor. Also, we have to stay on track. Is there a timeline of the events that should happen from now till our student goes to school? So, I mean, that's a pretty broad question, but to sort of try and narrow it down, I mean, from this point, as Ms. Usher said, the juniors will be starting the developmental counseling sessions on January 26th. So there are a number of different activities that will sort of open the door even further. And by the end of junior year, there's no set formula, but they ought to have in mind some teachers who could potentially write letters of recommendation for them. The teacher writes the recommendation in the context of the student within the classroom. The school counselor is the one who writes the recommendation on the student in the context of their high school experience. So that's an important piece as well. As Nicole said, in the beginning of senior year, they'll have an opportunity to work on their essay. So that search process really does begin as they start their developmental lessons. And then everybody's at their own pace. Shannon spoke about whether or not to submit an application depending on how a student is doing. So it is very much individualized. Would either of you like to add to that, Nicole or Shannon?
No, I think a big piece is it is individualized. I have students that are seniors that, finish their applications like the second week of school, and then I have some that are still working on them. So we always tell people, what I tell people is to submit the application when you're ready, when you feel it's the best picture of who you are. The transcript that we send initially has grades from 9th, 10th, and 11th and a senior year schedule. So sometimes people will wait if they want to see how they do in the senior year, or if they're taking more tests, or like in the fall, they are playing a fall sport or working, or any certain case that may impact the deadline that you're looking at. Definitely starting to think about and utilize Naviance now. That's definitely helpful in participating in the developmental seminars. Having your child schedule a meeting with their school counselor in the springtime as well, get that process going. They'll be taking the school day SAT on March 24th, so they'll have a result, a test score to determine whether, how they did, if that will mean that they want to look more at test optional schools, they want to do test prep, whatever the case may be. So really, I would say course selection is in February, and that's really kind of the genesis of how it really starts and ramps up.
For sure. And I think the only thing I will add, and this is more of this is really your own path. And I get you're in the hallways, your friends saying, hey, they're applying to school X, and then you feel stressed that you should be applying to school X. I get those peer-to-peer connections. I think use your conversations, whether it's with your teachers in the hallway, when you're talking to, the kid bagging your groceries at the local market. If they're asking where you're applying, use it as a way to kind of talk through things, not to be riddled with anxiety. That the college process, again, is really about you exploring your options, not where everyone else is applying, because I think that's where a lot of the stress comes from. The last piece here is, I really highlighted procrastination as a real thing. We always joke, we always like to see who the first kid's going to apply on August 1, because there's usually at least one application that comes in on August 1. And those are the students that are just hey, I want to be done with this and I want to submit. The kids that probably stress us out the most are the ones that apply at 11:59 the night before. And I'm just why do you wait? Why do you put so much stress on your family? So wherever you kind of fall in all of that, I think it's just important just to remain organized so that you don't cause additional stress on your family or your counselors. Your procrastination shouldn't become a burden for other people. So just think through some of those things, again, while you're on this journey alone. Well, with other people, with a great resource of people.
Thank you both. And our final question is, can we have letters of recommendation from outside school?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it depends. Some schools vary. Some schools are going to limit the number of letters of recommendation that can be uploaded to your Common App profile. So you may have a limitation of 1 or 2 or 3, depending on the school. There are some schools that are super cool and will allow for an outside letter of recommendation, whether that's from an alum or maybe a family priest or somebody that is important to you that you feel will add value. You don't want to become the kid that submits unnecessary letters of recommendation. You really want to think critically. Is this person submitting a letter that is different than maybe what my teacher's submitting or my counselor's submitting? And if you can answer that cleanly with an affirmative, yes, then I think that's fine. I tell this story all the time, but about 10 years ago, we had a student out of Chicago who sent in 87 letters of recommendation. And that, it's a real story. It was awful. And that you don't want to be that kid, because A, we'll talk about you for the rest of eternity, but B, that did not add any value. And you're clearly trying to hide something that's not great within the application. So just be really intentional about the people that are going to be advocating for you. And then just trust that process within itself.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, Nicole Usher, Shannon Kelly, thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful information. Like I said earlier, this session has been recorded and will be available on our website, which I am putting into the chat right now. That is the school counseling website. You can get to it from Ridgefield High School's website. Folks, thank you so much for joining us on this December evening. We had 101 people stay with us for the majority of the evening. And, you know, as we've said, breathe through this process. This is a collaborative experience. It's a match to be made, not a prize to be won. Our job is to inform and take this as an opportunity to identify those sources, in particular, your student's school counselor. I know for myself as the parent of a young adult now, at times it felt like maybe I could be doing more. And if I was around a circle of parents and I had heard something else or I read something on College Confidential, I felt like I needed to do something more. So we all have enough things to worry about in life. This is one of those things that I invite you to see as a journey. We are here to collaborate with you. Stay safe, stay healthy. Folks, happy holidays. Thanks very much for your time.